All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about two of the most powerful and, most hidden forces that shape pretty much everything we do. They drive our biggest ambitions, they fuel our deepest anxieties, but we almost never talk about them together. Yep, we're talking about sex and money.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to pull back the curtain on why this connection is so often kept in the dark. Then, we'll get into something called the attraction economy and see how our impulses in both areas are basically mirror images of each other. We'll also look at the very real, often staggering costs of intimacy before, finally, laying out a roadmap for how to build a real financial partnership.
Let me just ask you this straight up. What do you think are the two most powerful forces shaping our world? The things that really drive our biggest decisions, from our careers all the way to who we choose to love?
You guessed it, sex and money. And what's so wild is that while they're the engine behind almost everything, talking about them in the same breath is still one of our biggest social taboos. And honestly, that silence is costing us, big time. So let's start right there, with this unspoken nexus. We're going to break that taboo right now, because getting a handle on this link, well, it isn't just juicy gossip. It's an absolutely critical tool for your financial and personal well-being.
The whole idea really boils down to this. These are not two separate things. Sex and money are tangled together in this incredibly deep way. How you approach one profoundly shapes how you approach the other, whether you even realize it or not.
And this connection gets so much clearer when we start to explore what we're calling the attraction economy. To really get this, we've got to go back to some evolutionary basics to see how these two forces got so intertwined in the first place. Okay, think of the attraction economy like this. In our modern world, money has basically become the ultimate survival tool, right? It gets you food, shelter, safety. So it only makes sense that money has become a stand-in, a proxy, for the very traits we're hardwired to find attractive in a partner.
And you see this play out constantly in the dating world. Whether we want to admit it, wealth acts as this powerful, unspoken filter. It signals things like high status, long-term security, and access to cool stuff and experiences. Think about the clues on a dating profile, or the subtle questions that come up on a first date. All of that gets unconsciously wrapped up into our idea of someone's overall attractiveness.
And this whole dynamic doesn't just stop once you're in a relationship. Oh no. Financial imbalances, who earns more, who has the final say on big purchases, they create these subtle power struggles. Money becomes this silent negotiator in the background, and it can breed resentment that can totally poison intimacy without a single word ever being said about it. Which leads us perfectly into our third point, a mirror of impulse. And this idea is pretty profound. Your financial habits and your intimate habits, they're often just reflections of the exact same underlying psychology. Think about it. On one side, you've got financial impulsivity, the person chasing a huge win at the casino, or the shopaholic getting that dopamine rush from a new purchase. And on the other side, you've got sexual impulsivity, chasing an immediate thrill without really thinking about the fallout. The root cause? It's identical. It's a failure to think long-term and a lack of impulse control. So the big takeaway here is actually pretty simple. The discipline it takes to consistently save for retirement instead of splurging on the newest gadget, that is the exact same mental muscle you need to build a meaningful long-term relationship. In a very real way, getting your finances in order is an exercise in the emotional maturity you need for healthy intimacy. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit from the psychological to the intensely practical. Section 4 is all about the high cost of intimacy. We're going to look at the massive, real-world financial consequences our relationships actually have.
Let me ask you to think about this for a second. What do you think is the single greatest destroyer of personal wealth for the average person? It's probably not what you think. It's not a stock market crash or some terrible investment.
It's divorce. Statistically, there is nothing that torpedoes wealth accumulation quite like it. You're splitting assets, usually at the worst possible time, and you're suddenly trying to fund two households on incomes that used to support just one. The financial recovery from that can literally take decades. But it's not just about what happens when things go wrong. There are huge financial impacts at every single stage. There's the coupling penalty, the insane costs of weddings, mortgages, raising kids. But then there's also a single premium, which is all the extra money single people often have to pay for things like housing, insurance, and travel. Your relationship status has enormous financial implications, period. And, this is exactly why we're starting to see a huge shift in how people think about things like prenups. It's not about planning for failure anymore. It's about financial realism.
It's about having those tough conversations and setting really clear boundaries while you're both happy and in love, which can actually remove a massive source of anxiety down the road.
So how in the world do we navigate all of this? Well, our final section is all about forging a true financial partnership. It's about dragging these topics out of the shadows and into the light with some clear, actionable steps. And it really comes down to 3 core things. Number 1, radical transparency. That means every single card goes on the table. Income, debt, spending habits, all of it. No secrets. Number 2, you have to establish boundaries. This is the nuts and bolts, defining who does what, setting joint goals, even deciding on personal, no questions asked spending money. And finally, and maybe most importantly, recognize non-monetary value. Acknowledge that kindness, communication, and shared values, that's the real currency of a strong partnership, and it's worth way more than any bank statement.
And it is so important to get this. These kinds of financial boundaries, they are not restrictive. They are liberating. They create freedom from that constant low-level worry about money that can so slowly and quietly poison intimacy and trust.
At the end of the day, it all circles back to self-worth. When we value ourselves enough to be transparent, and when we manage our desires, both for money and for intimacy, with real discipline, we stop being pushed around by these massive forces. We actually start wielding them consciously to build the life we really want.
So as you think about this whole powerful, unspoken nexus of sex and money, what's the part that really stands out to you? Is it the subtle power dynamics that play out within a partnership? Or is it those bigger economic forces that are shaping our choices from the very beginning? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.